What would drive a 12-year-old child to orchestrate the cold-blooded murder of her entire family? It's a question that chills you to the bone, isn't it? This isn't some fictional tale or a plot from a movie. This actually happened right here in the quiet town of Medicine Hat, Alberta. A place where neighbors waved at each other in passing, and the idea of such unimaginable darkness seemed impossible. But in 2006, everything changed. Behind closed doors, a seemingly ordinary girl and her much older boyfriend were plotting something so horrifying that it shocked the entire nation and the world. Imagine this. A forbidden love story between a preteen and a 23-year-old man spirals into a twisted murder pact. Not just one victim, not two, but an entire family wiped out in one blood-soaked night. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. What if I told you that this child didn't just go along with the plan? No, she helped orchestrate it. A daughter who should have been loved and protected became the mastermind behind a crime so brutal that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend the level of cruelty. Before we dive into the chilling details of this incredible case, take a moment to comment below where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing you these powerful, thought-provoking stories. We want to hear from you, so don't be shy. Alright, now back to the story. Buckle up, because this tale will challenge everything you think you know about innocence, love, and the lengths people will go to in the name of obsession. Stay with me to the end, because the twists in this story will leave you speechless. The Richardson family was, by all accounts, an ordinary, loving household. They had their ups and downs, like any family, but to the outside world they seemed like a picture of stability. Jean-Marc, often called Marc by his friends, was a hard-working man who did everything he could to provide for his family. His wife, Deborah, was the glue that held them all together. A caring mother who juggled the challenges of raising two children while managing their home with unwavering devotion. They had two kids, Jasmine the eldest and Jacob their youngest. Jasmine was the kind of child who would light up any room she entered. Teachers praised her for her energy and creativity, and she had a knack for making friends wherever she went. Jacob, just 8 years old, was the typical little brother, playful, full of life, and always looking up to his big sister. The family had moved to Medicine Hat, a small city in Alberta, Canada, seeking a fresh start. Medicine Hat was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors, where kids played outside until the streetlights came on, and where families could carve out a peaceful life. For a while it seemed like the move was just what the Richardsons needed. They settled into their new home, found their rhythm, and built a life that from the outside looked almost perfect. But behind closed doors things were starting to shift. As Jasmine grew older, she began to change. What was once a bright, outgoing girl began to transform into someone her family barely recognized. The first signs were subtle, a little more attitude here, a little less interest in school there. But soon those minor changes began to snowball. By the time she hit her early teens, Jasmine had developed a fascination with the goth subculture. She started dressing in dark clothes, wearing heavy makeup, and listening to music that reflected a much darker, more rebellious tone. At first, her parents chalked it up to a phase. Every teenager rebels at some point, they probably told themselves. But Jasmine's transformation went deeper than typical teenage angst. She started pulling away from her family, spending more time online and less time at home. On the internet, she found a community that embraced her new identity, people who shared her love for goth culture and who made her feel understood in a way she didn't feel at home. It wasn't long before Jasmine crossed paths with a man named Jeremy Steinke. He was 23 years old, significantly older than Jasmine, but that didn't seem to bother her. In fact, it seemed to excite her. Jeremy, like Jasmine, was deeply involved in the goth scene. He dressed the part, acted the part, and most importantly, he made Jasmine feel special. He listened to her in a way she craved, and he told her things she wanted to hear. For Jasmine, Jeremy represented freedom from the rules and expectations of her family. But for Marc and Deborah, Jeremy was a nightmare. They quickly realized that this man's influence on their daughter was dangerous. They tried to intervene, setting boundaries, restricting her from seeing him, and doing everything they could to protect her. But every action they took only seemed to push Jasmine further away. The family dynamic was unraveling. What had once been a tight-knit unit was now filled with tension, arguments, and secrets. Mark and Deborah were desperate to bring their daughter back to the bright, loving girl they knew, but Jasmine had other plans. Plans that were darker than anyone could have imagined. This was no ordinary teenage rebellion. This was the beginning of a chain of events that would lead to unthinkable tragedy. The once perfect family was on a collision course with disaster, and no one, not even their closest friends, could see it coming. Jeremy Steinke's life was far from ordinary. Born into a troubled home, his childhood was marked by instability and pain. He was raised in an environment where he often felt out of place, misunderstood, and unloved. The scars of his upbringing left him searching for a way to cope, and he found solace in the goth subculture. To Jeremy, goth wasn't just a style, it was an identity, a world where he could embrace his darkness and be accepted for it. He wore heavy eyeliner, dressed in black, and immersed himself in music and communities that echoed his inner turmoil. But beneath the dark exterior, Jeremy carried a deep well of anger and loneliness. He wanted to belong, and he craved connection, something that his past had denied him. It was in this world that he met Jasmine Richardson. But to Jeremy, her age didn't matter. He saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who felt the same alienation he did. To Jasmine, Jeremy was exciting. He represented everything her parents had tried to shield her from: freedom, rebellion, and a sense of belonging that she hadn't found at home. Their paths crossed online, in the shadowy corners of the internet, where goth forums and social media brought together people who shared the same interests. Jeremy's intense, brooding personality drew Jasmine in. She was captivated by his charm, his attention, and the way he seemed to understand her frustrations with her family and life in Medicine Hat. Their relationship escalated quickly. Messages turned into late-night phone calls, and those calls turned into secret meetings. They bonded over their shared love for the macabre, their fascination with rebellion, and their mutual disdain for authority. Jeremy encouraged Jasmine's defiance against her parents, feeding into her growing resentment and convincing her that they were the ones holding her back from true happiness. When Mark and Deborah discovered the relationship, they were horrified. A 23-year-old man dating their 12-year-old daughter was unthinkable. They knew this wasn't just a phase or a harmless crush. Jeremy was a danger to their daughter's well-being. Determined to protect her, they took immediate action. They grounded Jasmine, limited her access to the internet, and confiscated her electronics to cut off contact with Jeremy. They forbade her from seeing him and tried to steer her back toward the life she had before him. But their efforts only deepened Jasmine's resolve. To her, her parents were the villains in her love story, standing in the way of her happiness. The more Mark and Deborah tried to intervene, the more Jasmine pushed back. She became withdrawn, spending even more time crafting an online persona that reflected her darkest thoughts. On her social media profiles, she painted herself as a tortured soul, a rebellious teenager trapped in a world that didn't understand her. Her posts became increasingly disturbing, filled with cryptic messages and images that hinted at her fascination with violence and chaos. Jeremy fueled these dark fantasies. He spoke to Jasmine about how they could be together without interference, whispering ideas of freedom that only heightened her anger toward her parents. Together, they created a dangerous echo chamber where their twisted ideas about love and revenge grew unchecked. Jasmine's resentment toward her family reached a boiling point. She no longer saw her parents as loving figures trying to protect her, but as obstacles that needed to be removed. Her once bright personality was now overshadowed by a dark and vengeful persona, one that thrived on the idea of rebellion and destruction. In secret, Jasmine and Jeremy began to hatch a plan. A horrifying plot that would free them from the restrictions of her family and allow them to be together forever. What had started as a forbidden romance was now spiraling into something far more sinister, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shock an entire community. This wasn't just about love anymore. It was about control, rebellion, and the dangerous power of unchecked emotions. The warning signs were there, but for Mark and Deborah, they were running out of time to stop what was coming. What began as whispers of rebellion between Jasmine and Jeremy soon evolved into something far more sinister. A pact to erase the barriers keeping them apart. Their private messages, exchanged online and through text, revealed the chilling depths of their plans. Jeremy often referred to himself as a 300-year-old werewolf, a persona he used to reinforce his twisted sense of power and destiny. He vowed to Jasmine that he would do whatever it took to free her, even if it meant gutting her entire family. To Jasmine, these promises were the ultimate declaration of love. In her mind, Jeremy wasn't just her boyfriend, he was her savior. Together, they painted her parents as villains, her younger brother as collateral damage, and their plan as the only way to secure their future together. April 23, 2006 was a quiet Sunday in Medicine Hat, Alberta. The Richardson family had no idea their lives were about to end in unimaginable violence. As the evening settled in, Deborah and Mark likely assumed their efforts to protect Jasmine were working. They had no idea that their daughter, the bright child they had raised, was now a willing accomplice in their impending deaths. Under the cover of darkness, Jeremy approached the Richardson home. He knew the layout well thanks to Jasmine's guidance. The basement window was unlocked, a detail carefully planned to allow him entry. As he slipped into the house, the weight of his mission seemed only to fuel his determination. Deborah Richardson was the first to encounter Jeremy. She was in the basement when he confronted her, and the attack was swift and brutal. She fought back with everything she had, but Jeremy's rage was unstoppable. The scene was chaotic, filled with the sounds of struggle and terror. Deborah's life ended in a violent flurry of stabs. Her body left lifeless on the floor. Jean-Marc, hearing the commotion, rushed to the basement to protect his wife. What he found was unimaginable. A stranger standing over Deborah, blood staining the room. Jean-Marc tried to fight off the intruder, but Jeremy, armed and unrelenting, overpowered him. The basement became a scene of horror as Jean-Marc too was viciously stabbed to death. His last moments were spent trying to protect the family he loved, a futile effort against the cold, calculated violence of their attacker. But the nightmare wasn't over. Upstairs, 8-year-old Jacob was fast asleep in his bedroom, blissfully unaware of the tragedy unfolding below. At some point during the carnage, Jasmine joined Jeremy. Whether she was there for the killings in the basement or stayed upstairs is unclear, but what is certain is her involvement in what came next. Jacob's room was supposed to be a place of safety, a child's sanctuary filled with toys and dreams. Instead, it became the final site of the Richardson family's undoing. Jeremy entered the room, and the details of what happened are almost too horrific to recount. Jacob, a child who adored his sister, was defenseless against the man who now stood over him. In the aftermath, investigators would describe the scene as one of pure savagery. Jacob was brutally stabbed multiple times, his small body no match for the relentless violence inflicted upon him. It's unclear if Jasmine played an active role in her brother's death, or if she stood by, watching as Jeremy carried out the final act of their plan. Regardless, the betrayal was absolute. Jacob's life was taken by the people he trusted most, his sister and a stranger she had let into their home. When it was over, the Richardson house was eerily silent. Jeremy and Jasmine had carried out their plan with a chilling resolve, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable carnage. 3 lives had been brutally extinguished, and the 2 who had orchestrated it felt no remorse. To them, this wasn't a crime. It was a necessary step toward their version of freedom. As the sun rose on April 24, 2006, the small town of Medicine Hat awoke to a crime that would haunt its residents for years to come. The Richardson family was gone, their home now a crime scene, and the town was left grappling with the horrifying truth of what had happened. The world Jasmine and Jeremy had envisioned was now a grim reality, one built on the blood of the innocent. As the Richardson home fell silent in the aftermath of unimaginable horror, Jasmine and Jeremy fled into the night, leaving behind a scene that would shock even the most hardened investigators. Their journey from the crime scene wasn't one of panic or regret, but of calculated escape. They believed they had pulled off the perfect crime, and in their twisted minds, freedom was finally within reach. Jeremy, the self-proclaimed 300-year-old werewolf, and Jasmine, the rebellious pre-teen who had traded her family for forbidden love, drove toward the future they had envisioned, a future stained with blood. Their first stop? A party. Yes, while the Richardson family lay dead in their home, Jeremy and Jasmine attended a party the next day as if nothing had happened. Witnesses later described their behavior as disturbingly nonchalant. They laughed, joked, and even boasted about what they had done. Jeremy reportedly bragged to partygoers about gutting Jasmine's family, while Jasmine, the once shy girl turned cold and detached, showed no remorse. To anyone paying attention, it was as if they believed they were untouchable. But their arrogance would be their undoing. As investigators began piecing together the events of April 23, it didn't take long for Jasmine and Jeremy to become prime suspects. The gruesome crime scene, combined with Jasmine's recent rebellious behavior, painted a clear picture for law enforcement. By the time the couple was identified, they were already on the run. Their escape took them over 100 kilometers away to Leader, Saskatchewan, a small town where they sought refuge. But even in hiding, they couldn't escape their growing notoriety. Accomplices like Casey Lancaster, a friend of Jeremy's, would later be implicated for aiding their flight. Lancaster's involvement, though not as direct, highlighted the disturbing web of influence Jeremy had cultivated. The arrest came swiftly and without much resistance. Law enforcement tracked the pair to a trailer in Leader, where they were taken into custody. For Jeremy, it marked the end of his delusional quest for domination. For Jasmine, it was the moment her carefully constructed world of rebellion came crashing down. But what truly shocked investigators, and later the public, was Jasmine's demeanor during interrogation. While Jeremy's bravado seemed to falter, Jasmine remained eerily composed. She answered questions with a chilling lack of emotion, her words calculated and devoid of remorse. In her locker at school, authorities found stick-figure drawings that would haunt anyone who saw them. These weren't innocent doodles of a young girl passing time. No, these were depictions of a brutal fantasy turned reality. Stick figures of her family being stabbed and killed. It was as if she had rehearsed the murders over and over in her mind, and these crude drawings were a reflection of the darkness that had consumed her. The coldness in Jasmine's demeanor, combined with the evidence found in her locker, painted a portrait of someone far removed from the innocent child her parents once knew. She wasn't the victim of a manipulative older boyfriend, as some had initially believed. She was an active participant, a driving force in the murders that ended her family's lives. The arrests marked the end of their brief but devastating journey together. Jeremy and Jasmine, who once saw themselves as soulmates destined to defy the world, were now nothing more than prisoners of their own creation. They had traded love for violence, rebellion for destruction, and freedom for confinement. As the small town of Medicine Hat struggled to comprehend the tragedy, the world looked on in horror, grappling with the question, how could a 12-year-old girl orchestrate something so heinous? The answer lay not just in the actions of that fateful night, but in the chilling aftermath that revealed the depths of their depravity. The day of reckoning arrived in the form of a courtroom, where the young faces of Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke would finally meet justice. The world was watching, horrified yet captivated by the tragedy that had unfolded. But what came next would challenge the very foundations of Canada's legal system, sparking an outcry that reverberated across the country. Jasmine, at just 12 years old, had already shattered any illusions of innocence. She became the youngest Canadian ever convicted of multiple first-degree murders. The shock of her conviction sent waves through the legal community, as the reality of a child orchestrating such a brutal act sank in. It was a case that left everyone questioning how such violence could be committed by someone so young, and how society could address a crime of this magnitude committed by a minor. The courtroom was tense as evidence was presented, painting a chilling picture of a premeditated and calculated crime. Jasmine's role in the murders of her parents and little brother was indisputable. Her behavior, her actions, and her cold demeanor during interrogation made it clear she wasn't a helpless child manipulated by an older boyfriend. Jasmine had been a willing participant in every part of the horror that unfolded that night. Jeremy Steinke, too, stood trial. The self-proclaimed 300-year-old werewolf who had convinced Jasmine that their love was destined to end in death was sentenced to life in prison. His life sentence was a fitting punishment for the man who had led a young girl down a path of violence. But unlike Jasmine, Jeremy's sentence was straightforward: life without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Jasmine's sentence, however, became a topic of heated debate. She was sentenced to a 10-year rehabilitation facus term in a youth detention center, a decision that sent shockwaves through the public. Some believed that at her young age she could still be rehabilitated, that there was hope for her to understand the gravity of her actions and change. Others, however, were appalled. How could a 12-year-old who had helped murder her family with such calculated coldness ever be rehabilitated? Was 10 years enough for such a heinous crime? The debate over youth sentencing in Canada reached a fever pitch. Advocates for harsher sentences argued that Jasmine's age shouldn't matter. A life had been taken, and justice demanded a fitting punishment. They pointed to the brutality of her actions as evidence that she was beyond saving, that the system should send a message that no one, regardless of age, could escape the consequences of such extreme violence. On the other side, those who advocated for rehabilitation argued that Canada's legal system needed to consider the circumstances surrounding her upbringing and the mental health issues that had likely contributed to her transformation. They emphasized that Jasmine was still a child, that she could be reformed, and that the goal of the justice system should be rehabilitation rather than mere punishment. Outside the courtroom, public opinion was divided. Some expressed outrage at what they saw as an injustice, while others felt a deep sympathy for Jasmine, who, despite her actions, was still a victim of a dysfunctional home life and a toxic relationship. The media exploded with stories of Jasmine's troubled past, her troubled relationship with her parents, and the disturbing online personas she had created. Yet, amidst all the noise, one thing remained clear: the Richardson family was gone, and no court ruling could ever bring them back. The trial and sentencing, while offering some measure of justice, did little to heal the pain left behind. The debate over youth crime and the punishment of minors would linger long after the final gavel fell. And as for Jasmine and Jeremy, their lives had been irrevocably altered, their fates sealed by a horrific crime that no one, least of all the young girl involved, could have ever fully understood. The case of Jasmine Richardson would forever be remembered as a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind even the most innocent facades, and the difficult questions society must face when it comes to justice for the young. As we try to make sense of the tragic events that unfolded that night, the motives behind Jasmine Richardson's involvement in her family's brutal murders seem complex and disturbing. It wasn't just youthful rebellion, nor was it purely the influence of Jeremy Steinke's manipulative and predatory behavior. It was a dangerous combination of both, a toxic cocktail of a troubled mind, misguided love, and the desperate need to belong. Jasmine's descent into violence was rooted in the influence of a man who preyed on her vulnerabilities, someone who twisted her perception of reality and love into something grotesque and deadly. But was Jasmine simply a victim herself, a young girl lost in the chaos of adolescence and influenced by a dangerous individual? Or was there something deeper, something darker within her that had the potential for such violence all along? What was the driving force behind her cold and calculated actions? Was she merely a confused child, or was she, as some have argued, capable of true evil? The case has left a lasting legacy, one that forces us to grapple with the idea of redemption, the potential for rehabilitation, and whether a young person like Jasmine could ever truly reintegrate into society. After completing her sentence, Jasmine was released, and while she has largely remained out of the public eye, the question remains: can someone who has committed such atrocities ever find peace, or are they forever marked by the weight of their crimes? Her reintegration into society was controversial, as many struggled to accept the idea of a convicted killer being given a second chance. However, as society debates whether she should have been given that chance, there is still no denying the complexity of her case, the challenges of dealing with youth crime, and the limits of rehabilitation. And yet, perhaps the most chilling question remains: was Jasmine's crime a result of youthful naivety gone horribly wrong? Or was it a glimpse into the true nature of evil in its purest form? Could she, at such a young age, have really understood the magnitude of her actions, or did she tap into something much darker within herself? As we reflect on this case, we're left with more questions than answers. What do you think? Was this a tragic case of a young girl lost in the chaos of growing up? Or is there a deeper, darker truth lurking beneath the surface? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.